Gentlemen, hey, congratulations for your documentary film here. Now, it's being showcased here at the Asian Pacific Film Festival. How does it feel for both of you?
It feels great. Just having a screening in LA. When you make a film, you never know where it's going, so it's really cool to have a screening here in LA.
And for me, I was born in LA. I've been on the East Coast for years and years and years, but I was born just a couple miles away from where we were going to be screening the film, and so there's something just personally really special about that, full circle kind of moment. And it's an amazing festival, and every screening, we've done some screenings in Northern California, and the audiences have been so fantastic, and we're just excited to connect with people here.
Most excellent. So, what sparked you guys to do this documentary in the first place?
Well, I think years ago when I got out of high school, I came to Los Angeles and I was doing a bunch of stand-up shows. I got on TV as a stand-up comedian, and then the natural progression was to do film and TV. And I started to do it, and I got roles, but I just felt like I was constantly just auditioning for stereotypical roles, terrorist, cab driver, and I just felt that this is not what I wanted to do. And each time I would ask the casting director, why are these the roles? And they would say, well, this is how America sees you. And I felt that was problematic for me because I grew up around Muslims and my family is Muslim. This wasn't the portrayal of Muslims that I wanted to be a part of. So I knew I had to come back to New York and figure out a way to reinvent myself. And I felt like the narrative needed to be changed. So I felt I wanted to tell the story of my dad. But I didn't know a lot about my dad. I just remember stories. So when I saw Vivek's films, the one on the cab drivers and then Mutiny, I felt that was the kind of collaborator I wanted to work with, because Vivek's films, especially Mutiny, was about the musicians in England, and he had contextualized how race and their struggles in England were about not just music, about what they experienced as South Asians. So I thought I didn't want to just tell a story about my dad. I wanted to also talk about what he endured and sort of the experiences that transformed him. I had a hunch there were others, but I wasn't sure. So when Vivek and I connected, Vivek just went down a rabbit hole and did a lot of this research. So what I think you see in the film is transformative for me, like emotionally, learning these things about my father, but also what Vivek brought to the project was this lost history of these South Asians that came to Harlem. And that's another great story too, because it was the African Americans and Puerto Ricans that welcomed them. And to think that there was a time where this solidarity occurred, where races weren't against each other, and this mono-minority myth. So we set out to try to tell this complicated story with nuance. And that it took us a long time. And even when we were trying to get grants, we were having problems getting grants. But it was once again CAM, the Center of Asian American Media, that really gave us our first grant, and we were off and running. And so here we are 2 decades later, just really happy that anyone comes to see the film. And in festivals, it's been doing really well. So we're overjoyed to be in Los Angeles and have new audiences see our films.
Wow.
When Alaudin first, when the two of us first met, it was in New York in the 1990s. And, the very first conversation we had, Alaudin told me, these fragments that he knew about his father, who had, died when Alaudin was just, 13, 14 years old. And what Alaudin knew about his father just flew in the face of everything that that I knew and about the story of South Asians in the United States, because the story was that there was some migration. Punjabis came to the West Coast in the early 20th century. Then the United States shut the doors in 1917 with this very severe anti-Asian immigration law, and then things didn't change again until 1965 when the doors opened up again, but to a very select kind of group of professionals, doctors, engineers, etc. So Alaudin's father's story, his life, transpired in this period where South Asians were supposedly not even here. And so that, that story just really grabbed me, and, we had connected already around, around music, around just a kind of common desire to break out of and challenge the reigning representation of South Asians in the United States that did center around the post-65 professional model minorities, and really explore these other stories that had been kind of pushed to the margins or hidden or lost or whatever. So when I started doing archival research to try to answer questions about Alaudin's father, like was he and his small circle of Bengali friends in Harlem in the 30s and 40s and 50s, where they just like this tiny group, the archives just started opening up, all these little different bits and pieces that I started to put together, brought forward this history that no one had talked about, of hundreds and hundreds of men from British India, from what's now Bangladesh, who had worked on ships, escaped the conditions on those ships when they got to New York, disappeared into the waterfronts, and then made their way to Harlem and the Lower East Side. And then, at a time when Asian immigration was banned, they found, homes and families and communities among African Americans and Puerto Ricans. And that story was just so important, that I think even when we didn't have funding early on, it's what drove us. This is a story that has to be told.
When you make a film, you're thinking about how to shoot it, how to film it. But this for us was like a joy to do the homework to make this film, because every day we were learning things. And I felt what was great is Vivek was discovering everything, in the research. And for me, emotionally, it was moving because, I joke about, like, our parents are fobs. We're like Americans. Like, I'm such a New Yorker. And, like, I remember my parents and my uncles, they'd sit in the living room and say, Boshan, sit down. We're going to tell you the story of 1947. But then in 1971, we became independent because we fought over language. We want you to speak Bengali, and you speak English. And they would tell me, because we gave our lives for this country. And when it became independent, it was called Bangladesh, land of the Bengali-speaking people. And I would have my basketball. I'm like, are you done? I want to go play basketball. I don't care about this. I really want to play ball. And they were like, just go. So, when we are a little kid, you don't value what your parents are telling you. You don't even think about your parents as kids. You think of them as like just old people. So I never imagined what, my father as a teenager, jumping a ship, landing in New York at 18. I mean, at 18, I just wanted to play basketball and hang out. To think that, like, my uncles and my dad left, their home in the village to come here. And then that's why I think the story of Asian Americans and South Asians is just incredible, because they left everything to come here to start a new world. And I know I took it for granted. And I would say to my mom, like, I'm hip-hop, we're fighting the status quo. We know how to fight the man. Not realizing that my father was a dishwasher and my uncles were laborers, and they dreamed of having their own business. And like, if I go to a laundromat and I don't have enough change, I freak out. How did these laborers become successful? So I felt like when I was in Hollywood reading for these stereotypes, I'm like, I don't want to tell these stories. That's why I told Vivek, we need to tell these stories. And so I felt like Hollywood was never going to give us the opportunity, because those decision makers really wasn't invested in our story. So it's really important that we tell those stories. If you look on Netflix right now, the reason Beef is successful is because Steven and Ali, they had Asian writers, Asian cinematographers. That was an Asian project, and that's why Beef has that nuance. We wanted to tell documentary films in looking at America through a new lens, the lens of our parents and our grandparents. And that's the way I feel documentary films, when it works, when it's authentic, when the primary source is us. When we're telling the story, we're telling it in a way that the audience has never seen it before. And so when they say, like, who's your target audience, I feel our target audience is for everyone, for them to witness the experience of our ancestors. And as Americans, we totally have taken for granted our parents' experience, but you know, we need to value them and celebrate them, and also talk about the struggles, because the Asian Exclusion Act, the Chinese Exclusion Act, the Asiatic Bar Zone, these were policies that prevented, you know, people coming to America. But the irony is that they found a way to come here. So I'm like, that's a magical story that needs to be told.
I mean, I especially like the film because I've never met someone, a Bengali person. I had to Google where Bangladesh was. So, and you know, being Asian myself, you know, we all, I guess in the end, we all have our own immigrant similar stories, you know, discrimination, racism, or even growing up as American. I mean, I guess I still technically can't say I met a Bengali. Technically, I met an American who's Bengali.
Yeah.
I mean, how does it feel telling this story, an Asian story, in this perspective, though?
I think for us, if I can speak also for Vivek, the great joy that we have is sitting in the back of the theater and watching the audience go on this journey. Because, like, we've had people who are, you know, Italian, Jewish, and say, well, our parents had that experience. What we're saying is that it is a unique story, but what makes it universal is that the human component of it is that, you know, yes, our family was laborers, but their pursuit of a better life is universal. And so that's the story that we're trying to tell. And I feel audiences really, they relate to that because they see the resilience in their parents and the adversity that they have to go over. So it becomes this human story that's really moving. Yes, there's funny moments, the music is great, but at the end of the day, you feel this connection to this feeling like you can identify with these people. And that's why, like, I wanted to change the narrative, because people have one view of Muslims. People have one view of us. And I wanted to change that narrative and humanize, you know, the journey of my parents and say, like, we've been in America just as long as any other race, and we experience the same things you do. We just maybe believe in a different religion, our names may be different, but, you know, we're just as American as anyone else, and our story needed to be told.
And I think this is, you know, something that's really important about this story in this particular moment, because we're now, you know, in a moment where there's an entire generation of South Asian young people who are now in their 20s and even 30s, who've grown up in the shadow of and facing the violence and vitriol that followed 9/11 for people, for South Asians and Muslims, right? And, you know, a key aspect of, like, you know, when the bully on the schoolyard is bullying South Asian and Muslim kids, when, you know, when anti-immigrant groups are you know, spouting their stuff, you know, there's this core idea that, like, you don't belong here, you're newcomers, you're outsiders, you're unassimilable. You know, these are all part of the kind of background for the violence that is perpetrated on our communities. And you know, with this film, one of the key things for us is to say, well, no, actually, you know, South Asians are not newcomers. You know, that South Asian and Muslim immigrants have been here for generations, that you know, because of the anti-Asian immigration laws, our migrations have had to stay under the radar, but they never stopped. You know, there are South Asian Muslim migrants who came here in the 1880s and 1890s. You know, there's, you know, part of a connected history of Bengali Muslims who settled in New Orleans, and one of the sons of that migration became really big in show business in Harlem in the 1920s and 30s. You know, there are ways in which, you know, these histories just, you know, establish and make clear that South Asians and particularly folks from what's now Bangladesh have been part of the fabric of cities like New York, New Orleans, Detroit for multiple generations, as long as like Italian Americans and Irish Americans, many of the other groups that are that people think about when they think about the U.S. as a nation of immigrants. I mean, the U.S. What this shows also is that U.S. has also been a nation of immigrant exclusion, but
and also hostility towards and creating policies against those immigrants. So if you look at the history of America, the Chinese Exclusion Act was created to keep Chinese out of America. Japanese internment was a reaction to Pearl Harbor, and of course it was an ignorant reaction. And so, and then we talk about, African Americans, after, the whole Reconstruction and how they attacked African Americans that wanted businesses. So when I'm a comedian and, someone tells me on stage, go back to your country, I have to laugh because I'm like, well, what's the country that you want me to leave? This country that you claim to be yours. Unless you're indigenous, it's not your country. And I realize that their view of me as a Muslim is the boogeyman. So the question is, how did they form that opinion? Mass media, the way that Muslims are portrayed. Most of the Muslims that I know, they're in New York, none of them will hurt anyone. They're like the most Americans So the Muslims that I grew up with are not the ones that they've demonized. So for me as a comedian, it's laughable. I'm like, where did you get your information? And so I know as a comedian, when I was here in Los Angeles, and a casting director would tell me, well, we want you to do it with a Muslim accent. And you go, oh, here's the problem. You think this is a Muslim accent. That's so ignorant. But in defense of them, they don't know any Muslims. They don't know anyone who, goes to a mosque. They're like, we have to kind of school them on that. And so and also we've been emasculated, and this is why I think it's important to, change that narrative. And what the arts does, it is not like CNN. We're telling it in a way that audience can receive it and go, oh, I didn't know that about Bangladeshis. And that's the magic of the arts. Whether you're a comedian or an author or an artist who, does visual work, or you're a filmmaker, arts makes you look out of a window you don't usually see out of. So while we're not, in this film, we're not like professors trying to educate you. We're trying to do something in the way of telling a story where you can see us as humans. And the best art I like is where you humanize the story. So it's been a delight for us because we spent so many years just trying to get the film made, and now that it's made, we want to kind of share it, because I think when you see it in a live setting, it's communal. Like, we don't want to give it away yet to a streamer. We like to, but we're really enjoying that in a live setting. People are really reacting to it in a way where they're having discussions like going, oh, I didn't know this is what people experience. So I think art is a step in the right direction to humanize people who have been mischaracterized, and we're trying to change that misperception people have of us.
Most excellent. One major thing that I also like to point out, because documentaries tend to have very limited budgets
or no budget.
or no budget. And you brought up the point of go back where you came from, and literally in your film you did actually go back where you came from. Talk about doing that part of the production, and for you, did it feel like fish out of water sometimes when you go back?
Yeah, it did. The reason that I went back to my country is because I felt in order to tell this story, for me it was like I say in the film, it's unfinished business. I wanted to know where, like I always say, we see our parents in our home, but we don't see the home that they ran from. So I wanted to know some questions like, why did they leave their village? What was going on in the village? And if you're going to tell the story authentically, I personally think every child of an immigrant should go back, because you look at your parents completely differently. Once again, I used to brag about, I was a graffiti artist, I was into hip hop. I'm in this culture that's about challenging the status quo, not realizing that the most radical thing you can do, living in a village with no running water and no access to what we see as technology today in the whatever in the 30s and 40s. They left that to come to in America to a dream of being an entrepreneur. That's like crazy, man. So I wanted to go to Bangladesh to kind of feel what that was like and let it marinate. And what was crazy is that when I went there by myself, also getting a crash course in filmmaking, because when you're in Bangladesh, you don't have the resources you have in New York and LA. You are on your own. And it's hot, there's mud, it's like a whole crash course in just how to shoot in the conditions that are not favorable as a filmmaker.
And we were lucky to be working with some really fantastic people on
the
that
crew
side.
the cinematographers in Bangladesh and the people there were phenomenal.
Yeah.
Just super talented.
And we were, this happened at this moment where, Alaudin, for years we had this plan that we were going to try to bring Alaudin's mother back to Bangladesh, to her village, and to film that and just kind of create the situation, for a kind of situation for discovery of her story, etc. But her health was declining, and we didn't have enough money at that point. And so, at a certain point, Alaudin called me up and said, "I'm going to Bangladesh." I bought my ticket, and I couldn't go because I was going.
I was like, Vivek, come on, let's go.
And I was like, I had taken this turn into academia, and I was going up for tenure at MIT, and I had all these, and so we did this thing where I put together a production plan, and there were various different kinds of scenes and plans for different kinds of footage, etc. And then we set up a kind of system where every day at the beginning of the day we would talk over Skype. Go over what would happen that day, and then every night we would talk again with the camera person rolling in the room, where I would kind of get a debrief from Alaudin.
It was almost like a video. It was like a video journal.
Like a video journal. And so of course, some of the stuff that was in the production plan, was filmed. But then a lot of it, once Alaudin was on the ground there, just, he had to just navigate whatever was happening. And, it was monsoons, it was just, a kind of a crazy time.
And one of the things, because we had like no budget, and I was telling them, like, I got this idea. Bangladesh looks so beautiful. It's not like Central Park. The greens here is different. Like, when you go to Asia, I can't describe it in words. The foliage is just different. The mud is different. The air is different. So I had this idea to shoot it up top. And then they were like, well, you can only do that with drones. I'm like, damn. So it's like, but we got to get drones. So it totally changed the whole, if you watch the film, the second act, it's almost like it's the eye in the sky looking at this beauty. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to show the audience that Bangladesh has this bad, and people have this bad stereotype of Bangladesh, being this poverty-stricken nation. But there's the landscape that's just breathtaking and beautiful. I wanted to bring the audience in on that, and we were like, we don't have any money for drones. So we had to figure out how to get the drones to shoot from up top. So the transition to Bangladesh is all aerial display. And I wanted to bring the village into like the screen so that when you're sitting in that theater, you've landed in Bangladesh. And so if you see the film, I walk a lot. So New York is me walking. But in Bangladesh, it's like, you're seeing Bangladesh, in the eyes of the sky and all this beauty. And that's what I'm saying, changing the narrative. We were super ambitious. Vivek was like, we don't have any money, man. But we scrambled. And, luckily, CAM was such a lifesaver because the Center of Asian American Media, once again, our Asian family is the ones that looked out for us. We tried to get all the white grants, but this is why CAM is so important to get that support, because it's the lifeblood of survival as a filmmaker. Because when you get like one grant, it'll you stretch it out for as long as you can. Because guerrilla filmmaking, there's a lot of limitations. You can't get the kind of camera work that you really would like to.
Most excellent. Well, let me wrap it up with one last question, because audiences everywhere will have a chance to watch this film. What is the one most important take you hope they walk away with?
I would like people to understand that representation is so important. Like, we don't. There is the economic point of it, but we don't need permission from others to tell our story. We should be telling our stories.
And I think, I think about, there's this one line that we ended up using in the closing part of the film, where Alaudin says there are so many stories. There are so many stories of South Asians in the U.S. And I think, the takeaway that I would hope is that audiences understand that, whatever kind of narrow set of representations you see of South Asians, whether they are the kind of horrible, terrorist cab driver kinds of images that Alaudin kind of pushed back on, or even the more recent images that see South Asians as primarily, suburban, upper middle class,
minority,
etc.
Yeah.
That those images are a very, very small slice of a much larger set of stories that encompass the complexities of the South Asian experience in the U.S.
Most excellent. Well, hey, gentlemen, congratulations for the film. Thank you for the conversation. And who could hate a Yankee fan, right?
Boston people. But we did really well in Boston. We had a good turnout there.
Most excellent. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you for having
Congratulations.
us.
Have fun at the rest of this film festival.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.